Hello, all my friends. Making sure everything's working here. Yes. This is going to be week 30 of your 5th and 6th grade science. How are you guys doing? Has the crazy caught up with you yet? As for me, a little bit. Last week, we started this 3-week unit on ecology. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. If you have a piece of paper handy and a pencil, you can write down these answers. But I want you to, these are the things I need you to remember from last week, and then we'll move on to some of the things I want to talk to you about for this week. So what is ecology? What is the actual definition? If you can remember, if you had a chance to write it down, or if you have a thought, kind of hold on to that thought. So ecology is the relationship of living things to each other and what's around them. So really, an ecologist is studying, relationships of animals and plants and their surroundings. A lot of stuff falls under ecology. What we learned about last week were the ecosystems here in Utah specifically, different ecosystems. Did you guys remember that video from last week? How beautiful. There's some really cool places to look at in Utah, the slideshow. I guess it wasn't a video, it was a slideshow. It's hard for me to remember. I am old, got a really old brain. So in Utah, we have very specific ecosystems. Can you remember how many we have? Now it's a tiny bit of a trick question. We have 3 distinct ecosystems. They are wetland, desert, and mountain. So those are the ecosystems we have here in Utah. Now, where the trick comes in, and maybe I don't know if I was super specific in making this distinction, but the mountain ecosystem is actually broken down into 2. So you have forest and alpine. And that's why we had the different, in the slideshow when we talked about some of the different plants and animals that belong in those ecosystems, how it's all in the mountains, but then you've got the forest and then you've got alpine. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that too. Those of you that were able to print the game, it's hard not being together and doing these really fun activities that we could have done. We shouldn't say could have. We're just doing the best we can. So sometimes we just have to figure out a way to get the same information in our brains, and you guys can do it one-on-one at home. So hopefully you were able to either print out those, the different biomes, the words, and then the plants and animals, and match them to the different ecosystem. If you weren't able to print, I apologize. It looked like for a couple of days we were having a hard time making sure that those were available, but I mean, it's been a whole week now. So hopefully we got that all straightened out. But I'm glad you took a minute to make sure that you could, understand how certain animals and certain plants belong in each one of those ecosystems. And did you notice that a couple of them definitely could overlap? So good to know. All right, that was last week. We are still working with ecosystems, but today we're going to talk a little bit about food chains and how energy is transferred through a food chain. Now, you guys are in 5th and 6th grade, so we have actually talked about food chains quite a bit, and we've done some really cool activities and worksheets and that. So this will be a little bit of a review. But the most important thing that I want you to understand today is how energy is transferred from organism to organism to organism. And those food chains are what sustain, that's kind of a hard word, are what sustain an ecosystem. So I've got 2 different videos for you to watch today. The first one I like a lot. The man that's narrating the video and giving us the explanation, he's in the Everglades, which is in Florida. Maybe some of you have been there or visited there. And so some of the animals that he talks about in his food chain, we don't have here. So it's kind of cool. All right, so let's go in and watch the first video, kind of explaining food chains. Now, I know you guys already know this when we talk about, producers and decomposers and predators. Those terms you guys know, but you think about it too in terms of how this relates to an ecosystem. One other thing I want you to remember or think about too while you're watching this, or just kind of have something, since we just got done talking about water and the water cycle, what do we know about the water cycle? Oh, and keeps going around and around and around, right? The water cycle never ends. So the food chain, it's also sometimes described as a food cycle. So what is your clue with that? Does the food chain, does it ever end? It doesn't, right? The food cycle, it keeps going. And so we know that that energy, see, 10 points for Mrs. Jensen's itchy nose. It's gonna drive me crazy too, because have you ever noticed once you start talking about it, then it makes it worse? It's like when you have a scratch and you can't scratch it, and then all you want to do is scratch it. That's the only thing you can focus on in your life. That's how I feel right now about my itchy nose. It's starting to make this eye water. Just really emotional today. Okay, let's get back on track. Sorry, everybody, give yourself a little slap. Okay, so what I was telling you is that like the water cycle, sometimes we call a food chain the food cycle, and how it just continues. You go from the producer and you go around, you know, to all the way and starts over and over again. So let's watch the first video on food chains. Let me get it queued up for you here. Okay, it looks like we've got it. We got it going here. Yep, there we go.
Here in the Everglades, as in all ecosystems, every living thing is linked together to form a very complex community. Everything is connected in some way. In order to grow and survive, there are two things that every organism needs: matter and energy. But where do these things come from? And how do they pass from one living thing to another? This process, the flow of energy and matter through a community, is most easily understood by constructing a simple illustration we call a food chain. Today, we'll construct a typical Everglades food chain. But the story really starts about 93 million miles from South Florida. The sun is like an enormous nuclear reactor, radiating its rays across the solar system. Without the sun's energy, there would be no life on Earth. Without the sun, there would be no plants, the first link in our chain of life. Green plants, as well as cyanobacteria and certain types of algae, are able to harness the energy of the sun, converting it to food energy in the form of sugary compounds. We call these organisms producers, and this is where our food chain begins. The Everglades are full of producers, from sawgrass to mangroves. One very important producer is a slimy goo called periphyton. Periphyton is complicated stuff, but it's basically a mixture of different types of algae. It can be found covering the limestone floor and many of the submerged plants of the Everglades. The second link of our food chain is occupied by what we call a primary consumer. This is an herbivore, or a plant eater. For our chain, we'll use the mosquito larva. In its larval form, the mosquito is an aquatic herbivore, swimming around munching on organic matter. It loves periphyton. The gambusia, on the other hand, loves mosquito larvae. This is why we also call him the mosquito fish. We'll stick him in the third link of our food chain. The gambusia is what we call a secondary consumer. Secondary consumers are animals that eat primary consumers. Because the gambusia mostly eats other animals, he can be classified as a carnivore. The great blue heron is a fish eater. He has a dagger-like bill designed for spearing and snatching swimming prey. The heron is able to nab some pretty big fish, but the gambusia makes a nice appetizer. Because he mostly eats secondary consumers, this makes the great blue heron a tertiary consumer and gives him a spot on our fourth link. Now for the big guy. The American alligator is a formidable beast. As a fully grown adult, he's way at the top of the food chain. He's what we call a top predator, also known as an apex predator. For the gator, an unobservant great blue heron would be gourmet dining. This guy is aware of the danger. Time to go sunbathe elsewhere. When we construct a food chain, we notice that there are usually no more than about 4 or 5 links from producer to top predator. There's a good reason for this. When one organism eats another organism, it uses up a lot of the food energy that is taken in, instead of passing all of it up to the next link in the chain. Much of that energy is used in digestion and other metabolic processes as the organism grows, and passes out into the environment as heat energy. At the same time, a lot of the matter is excreted as waste and is incorporated into the soil. In fact, the rule of thumb is that only about 10% of the energy that is consumed by an organism passes on to the next level. This is called the 10% rule. So basically, there can't be too many links in the chain, or the predators at the top of the food chain won't be able to get enough food energy to grow and survive.
Okay. Thank you. So how many of you guys are grateful that we don't live in the Everglades and can have an alligator be our apex, the predator that we need to worry about? We have others, right? In fact, I'm going to show you one more video. It's a brain pop. You guys know I love me a good brain pop. When he talked about the energy, how it moves through the food chain, we start out with our producers. Well, first of all, we start out with the sun, right? And as we move through the food chain, did you guys catch how he said that only about 10%, was called the 10% rule, 10% of the energy created by that organism is passed along to the next organism. When you talk about a food chain, a lot of times they'll refer to it as a pyramid. So not like our food pyramid, where we need to make sure we're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, and up at the top, very small amount of, is it fats and sugar? I can't even remember. But it has the same principle. So I'm going to show you this brain pop, and it's going to give you even, it just like hone in one more degree on looking at how animals in the food chain, how many there are in the different levels. So let's go ahead and watch that one. I'm just trying to get this one. So I skipped through the beginning of this brain pop because it's basically just 100% repetition of what we learned from the guy in the Everglades. But where we start here, they're gonna explain a little bit about the energy. Again, just kind of review that, and talking and showing it in the visual of a food pyramid. So let's go in and grab that. I'm gonna slide back just a hair. Okay, here we go.
Right. All of the energy in an ecosystem ultimately comes from the sun. And since the amount of energy decreases as it travels up the food chain, it can be represented as a pyramid. In general, each level of the pyramid gets 10 times less energy than the level below it. So let's say you've got a square meter of forest. Every year, the plants growing in that little patch produce 10,000 calories. That's a unit of energy. Now, let's say herbivores consume those 10,000 calories. They burn 9,000 calories and store 1,000 in their bodies. So for their predators, that square meter of forest produces only 1,000 calories of energy per year. That means there are going to be way fewer snakes and raccoons than rabbits and grasshoppers. See where this is going? Right. If the carnivores eat all of the primary consumers, they'll gain 1,000 calories of energy. They'll use up 900 calories and store 100 in their bodies. So for the top predators, that square meter of forest only yields 100 calories per year. Oh, come on. Sharks aren't part of the equation here. That's better. Anyway, since the bears and hawks have a fairly limited number of calories to live on, the ecosystem just can't support that many of them. So, in most cases, as energy decreases up the food chain, so does biomass, the combined mass of all the organisms. A small meadow might support 10,000 grasshoppers, 100 snakes, and only 1 or 2 hawks. Great, now let's get back to Shark Month. I think there's a special coming up about a shark who lent out money at a very high interest. Huh, who could that be? You know, there was something fishy about that guy.
So I don't know if you can hear that, but apparently someone is edging my backyard. So maybe we will close the window. Hold on. I don't know if that made it any better. He had moved along farther down the down the backyard. Okay, guys. One cool thing about Brain Pop. Let's go back in. When you guys are done, when you're done with the Brain Pop video, I will link this video in there if you want to. So I would love for you to go in and take the quiz. Now, this will review the same information that we had from the Everglades video. Now you can do it either in just review form or graded, see how you do. But one other cool thing in here, I kind of looked just a little bit, but there's a little bit of extra information in here. There's a game. There is, let's see, I think, is it this worksheet? No, if I remember, this is that's kind of, I mean, you could go through and fill that out. You know, are they a producer? Are they a primary consumer? Are they a secondary consumer? You guys could go through and fill those out if you want. So you guys know that at the end of all the Brain Pops, there's usually some kind of additional information, extra videos, a game, a quiz, sometimes a worksheet, sometimes some extra reading. So if you're curious about food pyramids or the food cycle, food chains, food webs, and you want to go in and click a few of those, there's actually another Brain Pop video on the food chain. Maybe I'll link that too, if you want to have something else that you can look at. So what did we learn about the food chain? I think right now, if I asked you to, each one of you could go through, and if we had some pictures and we were playing a game, I think you guys would be able to do a killer food chain, and you've got that basic understanding. But what I want to do right now is we're going to pull up this worksheet to look at. So I don't know if I can make it any bigger than that, but you guys can see that. So these are the vocabulary words that go along with our food web, food chain, food pyramid. So we know that the sun is the primary source of energy for plants. All food chains start with the sun. Ta-da! See that thing right there? If you guys were in class, you'd say, hey, click on it with the magnifying glass. Remember how I told you that I'm a little cray-cray? There you go. Okay, then he explained to us what a producer is. Producers get their energy by making their own food. Did you guys notice when he, the guy in the Everglades, he sunk his hands down into that yummy, gross, like plankton stuff, moss and algae? Yummy. So an organism that produces or makes its own food would be something like that, plant or algae. So they've gotten their energy from the sun, they grow, and they create their own food. Then we start working on the consumers. Now we know we had primary consumers, secondary consumers. We also had the apex, or like the top of the food chain, or the top of the food pyramid. And that's why I wanted to show you the video of the food pyramid, so that you can kind of have the visual too of that. There's several of those carnivores, those animals that are at the top of the food chain, and that's what they mean. They're at the top of the food pyramid. They are the ones that eat everybody else. So you guys can just go through, we can look at these real quick. So you've got your herbivores, your omnivores, you've got your carnivores. And then after you go through those different consumers, which are the animals okay, so let's go up here to consumer. Consumers get their food by eating other living things. So we'd start out with our producer, and then you go through and it goes up the chain until you get to the carnivores that get their energy they're the highest on the food pyramid. Then we'll move down here to, where did it go? Decomposers. Oh, there it is right there. So decomposers, things like worms, bacteria, mushrooms. What about, I keep wanting to say hawks, you guys. You're yelling it to me through the screen. Oh, you know, they pick apart the carcasses, the dead carcasses. Well, I cannot remember that name. You're probably yelling it like 20 times. Well, anyway, decomposers. They return the nutrients back to the soil from the dead plants and animals that they break down. Whether it's waste, whether it's a carcass, and then the food chain, the food cycle starts all over again. So there's just kind of some vocabulary words. I'll have that as a link where you guys can look at that if you want to go over some of those vocabulary words. And I still cannot remember what I'm trying to say. I keep wanting to say scavenger. Man, my brain. I hate it when one word just is completely gone. All right, you guys that are in my class, you know that happens. All right, so now that we've talked about food chains and food webs, we're gonna totally change gears. And I wanna talk to you about something called symbiotic relationships. So symbiotic relationships between, symbiotic relationships are between two or more species of animals. Not all animal relationships are like we just discussed, where it's eat or be eaten, like predator and prey. Some relationships are, they can exist, and they call these relationships symbiotic. And they're part of many food webs. So let's go. And we're going to go through a little PowerPoint here. Let's see. Well, hang on. Let me find it. All right. I got you. We're going to get there. So we've kind of left behind, not left behind, but we're still talking about ecosystems. And remember that ecosystems are the study of living things and their environment. So let's talk a little bit about symbiotic relationships, which just means that you've got relationships between species that aren't necessarily predator and prey. So we're just going to go through this, and at the end we've got a little bit of a quiz, and I want you to listen during these first 9 slides. Really pay attention. So if you need to, push pause, do 5 jumping jacks, maybe do a burpee, maybe go get a cold drink of water, and then come back and be ready to go. So I want you to look and pay attention to these first 9 slides. Here we go. Nope. Yep. All right. So when we talk about species, we're talking about all different kinds of different animals. Species within a community develop close interactions known as symbiosis. Sym meaning together, and bio meaning life. So symbiosis means living together, and it describes the close relationship developed between species. Symbiotic relationships will always benefit at least one of the organism involved. So those of you that we talked about, like in growth mindset, we talk about win-win, lose-lose, win-lose, lose-win. In a symbiotic relationship, we're always going to be in the win-win, win-lose, lose-win. Somebody is going to benefit from the interaction. So here's our species interactions. So we have predation, parasitism, competition, mutualism, and commensalism. Man, you guys, I need someone to pronounce all these words for me. Okay, let's go through each one of them. So predation. Now here's when we're talking about predator and prey. It's a relationship where one organism captures and consumes another. The predator is the captor, and the prey is the one being captured. So I love that we've got fish are friends, not food here up in the corner. A predator's survival depends on its ability to catch its prey. So we know the different adaptations that predators have, right? They've got venom, they've got poison, they've got sharp teeth, they've got speed, they've got, all the different things that make a predator very dangerous. But then your prey's survival depends on its ability to avoid being caught. So this is when we talk about camouflage, and we talk about defense mechanisms like chemical defenses, spraying something or having, mimicry, where you look like something that should be poisonous, and so your predator would steer clear of you. You guys all been listening in Animal Encounters? That's big Animal Encounter stuff here. All right, parasitism is a symbiotic relationship where one organism is harmed and the other is helped. So we're talking about a parasite. Parasite feeds on the host organism. So unlike predator-prey, it doesn't result in the immediate death of the host. So the example they give us here is a parasite could be a tapeworm, or a tapeworm can it can feed on the host organism, but it doesn't necessarily kill them. That tapeworm can live inside the human digestive tract for a long period of time. But it may cause lots of problems and discomfort, but it isn't going to necessarily harm or kill the host. So that is a parasite win, host lose, but luckily not death. There's two different kinds of parasites. There's ectoparasites and endoparasites. So just like we've looked at through animal encounters, external parasites live on the outside of the host. So ticks and fleas and mosquitoes. Oh, you guys, I saw those in that last video. We need those mosquito fish. I know some of us use different kinds of animals here to get rid of our Utah mosquitoes. We need those. And then those endoparasites, and this is what's living inside of a host body. So that would be like that tapeworm or other bacterias. Those are your different parasites in parasitism. Now, competition is the use of the same limited resource by two or more species in the same place at the same time. So resource would be like water, nutrients, light, food, or space. So think about two similar carnivores, and they're competing for the same resources. They all want to eat the same animals that are available to them. So in our food pyramid that we looked at before, you had what was it? Was it a hawk and a raccoon? I know they replaced it with a shark. That was funny. But so you have these other carnivores that would be in competition for the same resources. And it may cause the development of different niches or physical characteristics. So different things that, different adaptations that these animals might have so that they would be the ones that can get the resources. So when you talk about competition, you think about that. Now, mutualism is a symbiotic relationship where both organisms are helped in some way. So plants and their pollinators. The pollinators feed on the plants and the pollen gets stuck to them. And then the pollen, because it's stuck to the pollinator, it's deposited on the next plant, allowing the plants to be pollinated. So mutualism is a symbiotic relationship that is beneficial to both of the parties, both of the species. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship where one organism benefits and the second is neither harmed nor helped. So this is a relationship where somebody gets a benefit and the other person's like, didn't hurt me, didn't help me. So here's whales and barnacles. Barnacles have the benefit of moving through the waters once they attach to the whale. So the barnacles get to move, they get a free ride on Mr. Whale, but it doesn't hurt the whale or it doesn't hurt him or help him. He's just the host and he takes the barnacles to the next place. So commensalism is a symbiotic relationship. So somebody is benefited, the other person neither harmed nor helped. So let's go through now, and I'm going to ask you about these different kinds of symbiotic relationships. So ostriches and gazelles. So there they are out on the savannah. What do you think their relationship is? What kind of symbiotic relationship do ostriches and gazelles have? Think about their food sources. Think about their adaptations. Think about where they live. This is commensalism. Ostriches and gazelles eat next to each other and they both watch out for danger. So eat with commensalism. They have something in common and neither one is, it's not predator prey, it's not, neither one is being harmed. How about the symbiotic relationship between cuckoos and warblers? You guys, I swear there is a warbler outside of my bedroom window because every morning when the sun comes up, I hear, oh. So if I were the prey or the predator, no, just kidding. All right, cuckoos and warblers. What is their symbiotic relationship? Parasitism. Now a cuckoo bird will lay its eggs in a warbler's nest. The warbler will then take care of the cuckoo's eggs. But when the cuckoo hatches, it will push the other eggs out of the nest. So this is one where one is harmed and the other is benefited. How about oxpeckers and rhinoceroses? How come they don't call it rhinoceri? Rhinoceroses. So I think this is one that we see a lot in movies sometimes, how they hitch a ride on that rhinoceros. This is mutualism. The oxpecker bird gets a free meal when it eats the ticks and bugs that drink the rhinoceros's blood, but the rhinoceros isn't killed, it isn't harmed, and that oxpecker gets to go wherever it wants. How about remoras and sharks? Remoras and sharks. Commensalism. A remora fish attaches itself to a shark so that it can eat the scraps of food that are left by the shark. So it doesn't harm the shark where it attaches or when it attaches. We've had a couple with sharks, right? Those barnacles. No, that was a whale. Barnacles attached to the whale, not a shark. There was a shark in the Brain Pop video. All right, how about fleas and mice? What do you think? What is their symbiotic relationship? Parasitism. The flea hooks into the mouse and it drinks the mouse's blood. Now, this is one where the mouse isn't going to die from that. It might make it sick, it might make it weak, but it doesn't kill it. It's beneficial for the flea. How about lions and hyenas? Again, we're out on the savannah here. Competition. Hyenas and lions cover the same ground, they hunt the same prey, and they scavenge the same remains of animals. Vultures. You guys, I just remembered, it's vultures. That was what not scavengers. Are you so proud of me? Pat me on the back. Vultures popped into my head. Vultures are decomposers. Okay. Hyenas and lions their symbiotic relationship is competition. So the last sentence here, consequently, they steal food from each other, they chase each other, and they even kill each other's young. So here's one where they're both trying to they have the same turf. And so they're in direct competition with each other. How about a salmon and a grizzly bear? You guys, we watched Brother Bear the other day for something to watch. It made me think of all these cute bears. Sorry, sidetrack much? What's their symbiotic relationship? Predation. The grizzly eats the salmon. The grizzly is the predator and the salmon is the prey. Easy, right? Have you guys ever watched videos of the bears when the salmon's swimming and the bear can just reach in and grab one? I think it's amazing. All right, how about storks and bees? Any idea? Storks and bees? Mutualism. The stork uses its sharp beak to cut up the dead animals it eats, and then afterwards, bees of a certain species will come along and lay their eggs in the dead meat so that they can hatch. Gives them a nice little place to hatch. How about hermit crabs and snails? Give yourself a second to think. What's their symbiotic relationship? Commensalism. Hermit crabs live in snail shells that the snails have left behind. Silverfish and army ants. What do you guys think on this one? Commensalism. Silverfish bugs live and hunt with army ants, and then they share the prey. So they have that same thing in common. All right, I got a funny one for you. So these last two slides are going to talk to us about what kind of symbiotic relationships we think that members of a family have. So what do you guys think? In our different family structures, what are the symbiotic relationships that are possible? So be thinking, what's your role in your family? Are you the big brother or sister? Are you the little brother or sister? Are you the only child? Do we have, how do you fit into that? What kind of relationships, what kind of symbiotic relationships could there be in a family? Think about it for a minute. No predator prey. That's just not okay. So the answer varies depending on your position in the family. So if we were all together, if you had symbiotic relationships based on your place in the family. So in mutualism, everybody benefits. So everybody gets along. That's, your relationship there in the family, people contribute. Everybody benefits from the things that happen. But we also could have relationships like commensalism, where only one person benefits, and then other people are neither benefited nor harmed. Maybe kind of like the whale and the barnacles. What about competition? That happen in any of your families? You and one or more of your family members is competing for resources. So I know I see this sometimes at the dinner table. There's only one resource. Maybe there's only one role left. So could there be a competition symbiotic relationship there, where out here on the savannah of my dinner table, there's only one role. Who's gonna get it? The big brother, the little brother, the big sister, the little sister. Now, but if you're in a situation where it's only you, who gets the role? You're gonna have to arm wrestle somebody for it. That's just kind of a fun way to think about symbiotic relationships and how you might see them in a different light, and not just out in the animal kingdom, but you might see them actually in real life. Okay, you guys, that's it for today. So just to review, we went and we talked about food chains, food cycles, and how it's sometimes called a food pyramid. I know each one of you guys could name the different steps along the food chain. What does it start with? The sun. And then we go to producers. And then producers. And then we go to the different levels of like omnivore, carnivore, who's the very top of the food chain, who's the last guy that gets everything. I want you to remember the 10% rule, and how energy, if one organism created X amount of energy, only sends 10% to the next level up the food chain. So that's why it's important that the food chain always continues, and that we have at the very end of the food chain, we have those decomposers that return that energy that's left back to the earth or back as heat up, and then the cycle starts over again with the sun. And that's how our ecosystems survive. Food chains. If you go to the Brain Pop site and you want to do any of those quizzes or games, that might be a fun way to sort of review. You guys can go back and look at the vocabulary page. Maybe do a little quiz on yourself, see if you can remember the definitions of those different members or parts of the food chain. And then we stopped and we moved on to symbiotic relationships in nature with different animal species. So why are we talking about this? If we were talking about ecology, and it's the way a species interacts with other organisms or other species and its environment, see how it falls right in with ecology. So those symbiotic relationships, and every time I put my hand on it, it shakes the computer. As we look at our surroundings and we look at different animals and different species, we get to see how their interactions are and study them. That's what an ecologist would do, and how it affects the ecosystem, how we see different adaptations in animals. Why they're created. Is it because of commensalism? Is it because of parasitism? Is it because of mutualism? Do they even need some kind of a defense mechanism if you're not a predator-prey? But what kinds of adaptations and what kinds of effect that has on the ecosystem that they live in. So this is all kind of cool. Next week, we'll finish up ecosystems, and it will be our last lesson for the year. So watch out for that. There's really no assignment for you to do this week. Just review that information. So you guys have got it up there, and we will move on next week to our last week of ecosystems. So good job, you guys. Vultures. I will never forget that word again. See you next week.